There was a time when butterflies were enough, when tension felt exciting, when unpredictability felt passionate, when chemistry alone could convince you this had to be love. But now you're not impressed by sparks. You're impressed by safety. You're not moved by intensity. You're moved by consistency. And somewhere along the way, emotional availability became more attractive than chemistry, not because you got boring, not because you lowered your standards, but because you healed enough to realize that chaos was never love. It was adrenaline. And you're not addicted to that anymore. You used to confuse emotional stimulation with emotional connection, the push and pull, the hot and cold, the late night vulnerability, followed by morning distance. It felt electric because it activated something in you. It made you feel chosen, but never secure. It made you feel wanted, but never safe. And that unpredictability, it kept you hooked because your nervous system thought intensity meant importance. If it felt overwhelming, it must be real. If it felt urgent, it must be destiny. If it made your heart race, it must be love. But racing hearts can also mean anxiety. Butterflies can also mean uncertainty. And longing is not the same as alignment. You didn't know that before because no one teaches women the difference between chemistry and compatibility. Chemistry is instant. Compatibility is intentional. Chemistry is about attraction. Compatibility is about capacity. And capacity is what sustains love. You started noticing something. The men you had the strongest chemistry with were often the least emotionally available. They were charming, magnetic, confident, but when it came to depth, they were inconsistent. When it came to reassurance, they were avoidant. When it came to accountability, they disappeared, and your body knew. Even when your mind tried to romanticize it, you began realizing that chemistry without emotional safety feels intoxicating, but unstable. It's a roller coaster, and roller coasters are exciting, but no one builds a home on a moving track. Emotional availability, on the other hand, felt different. At first, it even felt unfamiliar. Calm, predictable, grounded. No guessing games. No decoding silence. No wondering where you stood. And because you were used to chaos, calm almost felt boring. But it wasn't boring. It was regulated. It was mature. It was stable. And stability doesn't spike your adrenaline. It regulates your nervous system. You realized something powerful. You weren't attracted to unavailable people because they were special. You were attracted to them because they were familiar. Familiar to what you had tolerated. Familiar to what you had grown up around. Familiar to love that required proving. So chemistry felt like validation. If someone emotionally distant chose you, you felt worthy. But when someone emotionally available chose you, you felt exposed. Because real availability requires you to be available too. And that's deeper than flirting, deeper than tension, deeper than sparks. Emotional availability means they communicate clearly. They don't disappear when conflict happens. They don't punish you with silence. They don't make you compete for attention. They don't flirt with uncertainty. They stay. They respond. They show up. Not just when it's easy, but when it's uncomfortable. And suddenly, that became attractive because you got tired. Tired of decoding mixed signals. Tired of performing calm when you felt anxious. Tired of pretending you were chill when you were actually confused. Tired of chasing clarity. You realized something crucial. Chemistry can start something, but emotional availability sustains it. Chemistry pulls you in. Availability keeps you safe. Chemistry feels like fire. Availability feels like warmth. And warmth is what you can build a life around. You started valuing The man who texts back consistently. The man who says what he means. The man who doesn't flinch at vulnerability. The man who asks questions and listens to the answers. The man who doesn't need you to shrink your needs, to feel comfortable. That kind of presence used to feel ordinary. Now it feels rare because emotional maturity is rarer than charm, and you no longer care who gives you butterflies. You care who gives you peace. That shift, that's growth. That's self-worth expanding. That's you realizing that love isn't supposed to activate your survival instincts. It's supposed to soften them. You stopped chasing the spark and started honoring the steady flame. Because the woman you are now isn't impressed by tension. She's impressed by safety. And safety is attractive. When you've finally learned, you deserve it. There's a quiet moment that changes everything. It's the moment you realize that what once gave you butterflies now gives you a headache. The late replies, the mixed signals, the intense eye contact, followed by emotional distance. It used to feel thrilling. Now it feels exhausting. And that exhaustion is not bitterness. It's clarity. You started noticing something subtle. The men who created the strongest chemistry also created the strongest anxiety. You checked your phone more. You reread messages. You replayed conversations. You analyzed tone. You questioned timing. You adjusted yourself. Chemistry had you performing. Emotional availability doesn't require performance. That's the difference. Chemistry says, impress me. Availability says, be yourself. And when you've spent years trying to earn love through effort, attention, and emotional labor, availability can feel almost disorienting because no one is pulling away. No one is making you prove yourself. No one is dangling affection. It's just steady. And steady doesn't activate your fear. It regulates it. That's why at first, you almost mistook calm for lack of passion because you were used to passion being loud, dramatic, uncertain. But drama isn't depth. It's dysregulation. Real depth is quiet. It's the man who can sit with your emotions without trying to escape them. It's the man who doesn't turn conflict into a competition. It's the man who doesn't disappear when you express a need. And here's what changed inside you. You stopped craving intensity and started craving capacity. Capacity to communicate. Capacity to hold space. Capacity to take accountability. Capacity to stay. Because chemistry without capacity always collapses. It burns fast. It fades faster. And it leaves you wondering why something that felt so strong couldn't survive basic reality. You used to think, if it's this intense, it must be meant to be. Now you think, if it can't handle honesty, it's not meant for me. That shift is powerful. You began seeing how chemistry can be rooted in projection. You see what you want to see. You fill in gaps. You imagine potential. But emotional availability leaves no gaps. It's clear. It's direct. It doesn't require fantasy to feel meaningful. And when a man is emotionally available, he doesn't just talk about connection. He demonstrates it. He doesn't flirt with vulnerability and then retreat. He doesn't open up and then punish you for doing the same. He doesn't say, I care, and then act indifferent. His words and behavior align. And alignment is attractive because alignment feels safe. You started realizing that what you used to call chemistry was often just unpredictability. And unpredictability creates dopamine spikes. But dopamine spikes are not the same as emotional intimacy. They're addictive. And addiction feels intense. But healing feels calm. When you heal, your nervous system changes. You're no longer magnetized to emotional unavailability. You're no longer drawn to what feels chaotic. You begin to feel turned off by inconsistency, not because you're rigid, but because you're regulated. And regulation makes you selective. You don't feel sparks. For people who can't meet you emotionally, you feel indifference. And that indifference is growth. You started valuing conversations. That goes somewhere. Plans that are kept. Feelings that are expressed clearly. You started noticing how attractive it is when a man isn't afraid of intimacy, when he doesn't treat emotions like weakness, when he doesn't make vulnerability a punchline, when he doesn't vanish after getting close. That kind of presence is magnetic in a different way. It doesn't overwhelm you. It grounds you. It doesn't make you question your worth. It affirms it. And something even deeper happened. You stopped needing to feel chosen by someone hard to access because you chose yourself. So the thrill of winning someone over lost its appeal. You no longer want to unlock someone. You want to be met. You don't want to decode someone. You want clarity. You don't want to convince someone. You want mutuality. Chemistry once made you feel alive, but emotional availability makes you feel secure. And security isn't boring. It's powerful. Because when you feel secure, you're not shrinking. You're not overthinking. You're not hyper-aware of every shift in tone. You're relaxed. And when you're relaxed, you can actually connect. You can laugh without anxiety. You can express without fear. You can love without bracing for impact. That's what changed. You stopped romanticizing what hurts. You stopped calling inconsistency mysterious. You stopped calling avoidance independence. You stopped calling emotional distance strength. You started calling it what it is, unavailable. And once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. Suddenly, the man who used to give you butterflies just gives you red flags. And the man who once seemed too calm now feels like peace. Peace became attractive because peace feels like self-respect. And self-respect always changes your type. You didn't lose your spark. You refined your standard. You didn't become less passionate. You became less impressed by dysfunction. Chemistry can ignite attraction, but emotional availability builds trust, and trust is what love grows from. You're no longer chasing fireworks. You're choosing foundation, and foundation is what lasts. Let's talk about the part no one likes to admit. Unavailability can feel addictive, not because it's healthy, but because it's unpredictable. And unpredictability creates obsession. When someone is inconsistent, your brain doesn't relax. It scans. It waits. It anticipates. You become hyper-aware. And that hyper-awareness can feel like passion. But it's not passion. It's activation. You were activated. Activated by the highs. Activated by the lows. Activated by the sudden warmth. After distance. And those cycles bond you quickly because relief feels powerful. After anxiety, when he finally texted back, dopamine. When he opened up after being distant, euphoria. When he chose you after pulling away, validation. But what you were bonding to was the relief, not the person. That's why it felt so intense. It wasn't stable enough to be secure, so your body stayed alert. And alert can feel like chemistry, but chemistry rooted in anxiety always demands payment. It costs sleep. It costs peace. It costs self-trust. You started noticing how much mental energy it required to stay connected to someone emotionally inconsistent. You monitored tone. You adjusted timing. You softened your needs. You convinced yourself you were low maintenance. But you weren't low maintenance. You were over-accommodating. You were trying to maintain connection by minimizing yourself. And that's exhausting. The shift happened when you stopped confusing effort with compatibility. Just because something requires effort doesn't mean it's valuable. Just because it feels intense doesn't mean it's aligned. You realize something powerful. If connection feels like survival, it's not intimacy, it's attachment insecurity. True emotional availability doesn't create obsession, it creates steadiness. It doesn't leave you wondering, it leaves you understanding. It doesn't make you chase, it makes you collaborate. And collaboration feels different from pursuit. When someone is emotionally available, you don't feel like you're trying to win. You feel like you're building. There's no power struggle, no emotional tug of war, no guessing games. And because there's no chaos, there's no adrenaline spike. At first, your body might miss that spike. It might interpret calm as lack of attraction, but calm isn't lack. Calm is safety, and safety allows desire to deepen instead of explode. You begin noticing that when someone is emotionally available, they don't punish you for asking questions. They don't withdraw when things get real. They don't disappear after intimacy. They don't weaponize silence. They stay consistent before and after closeness. That consistency creates trust, and trust creates real intimacy, not fantasy, not projection, not longing. Intimacy built on trust doesn't feel dramatic. It feels secure. You can disagree without fearing abandonment. You can express a need without fearing distance. You can be imperfect without fearing rejection. And that kind of emotional environment is magnetic in a mature way. It doesn't grab you, it grounds you. You stopped craving the chase because you stopped equating struggle with value. You stopped seeing emotionally unavailable people as mysterious. You started seeing them as limited, not bad, not evil, just limited. Limited in emotional depth, limited in communication, limited in capacity. And you no longer try to stretch yourself to fit inside someone else's limitations. That's growth. You also stopped taking unavailability personally. Before, you internalized it. If I were prettier, if I were calmer, if I were less emotional, if I asked for less. Now you understand. Someone's inability to connect is not proof of your inadequacy. It's proof of their capacity. And capacity matters more than chemistry, because chemistry can exist without emotional responsibility, but love cannot. You began valuing the man who doesn't make you earn reassurance, the man who doesn't disappear when you get closer, the man who doesn't treat vulnerability like a threat, the man who doesn't call you too much for wanting clarity. That man might not create fireworks, but he creates foundation. And foundation is what you build a life on. You realize something else. When you're addicted to chaos, peace feels empty. When you heal, peace feels attractive. That's the shift. Your nervous system matured. Your standards matured. Your attraction matured. You no longer confuse emotional distance with depth. You no longer confuse silence with strength. You no longer confuse tension with compatibility. You crave presence. You crave consistency. You crave emotional courage. And emotional courage is rare. It's rare to find someone who can sit in discomfort without shutting down. It's rare to find someone who can communicate clearly without ego. It's rare to find someone who chooses connection over control. And when you encounter that, it feels different. It feels safe. It feels steady. It feels real. And real became more attractive than intense. You didn't become less romantic. You became more discerning. You didn't lower your expectations. You raised your standards. And standards shift attraction. The woman who once chased sparks now protects her peace. The woman who once felt magnetized by chaos now feels turned off by it. The woman who once equated unpredictability with passion now recognizes stability as strength. That evolution changes everything because once emotional availability becomes attractive to you, you can't go back to confusing adrenaline with love. Here's what no one tells you. When emotional availability becomes attractive to you, your entire dating life changes. Not because the world changes, but because you do. You start noticing red flags faster. Not dramatically, not angrily, just clearly. You don't argue with inconsistency anymore. You observe it, and then you move accordingly. You don't try to convince someone to communicate better. You watch how they communicate and decide if it aligns. You don't try to teach someone how to show up. You let their capacity reveal itself. And that shift alone filters out half the chaos. Because emotionally unavailable people don't thrive with emotionally grounded women. They thrive in confusion. They thrive in chasing and being chased. They thrive when there's imbalance. But when you stop overfunctioning, stop overgiving, stop overexplaining, they feel it. And often they leave. Not because you're too much, but because you're no longer participating in the dynamic that made them comfortable. That's when you truly understand something. Chemistry can pull you in, but availability determines if it stays. When you prioritize emotional availability, you start asking different questions. Not, do I feel butterflies? But, do I feel safe expressing myself? Not, is he exciting? But, is he consistent? Not, does he want me? But, can he meet me? That last question changes everything. Because meeting someone requires emotional presence. It requires self-awareness. It requires accountability. It requires the ability to stay when things aren't perfect. And when you begin valuing that, you stop mistaking potential for partnership. You stop romanticizing almost. You stop waiting for someone to become who they promised they could be. You start choosing what's already real. And here's the deeper shift. When you are no longer attracted to chaos, you stop entertaining it, which means your time is no longer spent trying to fix what resists growth. It's spent building with someone who's capable. Emotional availability doesn't mean perfect. It doesn't mean overly emotional. It doesn't mean constant talking. It means emotionally present. It means when there's conflict, they lean in, not out. When you express a boundary, they don't retaliate. When you share vulnerability, they don't minimize it. When they make a mistake, they acknowledge it. That's maturity. And maturity is attractive when you value yourself. You also start noticing something else. When you choose emotionally available partners, you feel more like yourself. You laugh more naturally. You don't rehearse conversations in your head. You don't feel the need to shrink your emotions. You don't feel like you're walking on glass. You feel steady, and steadiness allows intimacy to deepen over time, not spike. Deepen. There's a difference. Spikes are dramatic. Depth is intentional. Spikes burn bright. Depth builds roots, and roots are what hold love in place. When life gets hard, because life will get hard, stress will happen, disagreements will happen, uncertainty will happen, and chemistry alone cannot carry you through that. But emotional availability can, because it allows two people to problem solve instead of power struggle, to communicate instead of withdraw, to repair instead of punish. That's when you realize emotional availability isn't less passionate, it's more sustainable. It doesn't erase attraction, it refines it. You still want chemistry, but now, chemistry without capacity is a deal breaker. You still want sparks, but not at the cost of stability. You still want desire, but not at the cost of your nervous system. And that's the evolution. You didn't become boring. You became aligned. You didn't lose your ability to feel deeply. You gained the ability to feel safely. That's powerful because a woman who values emotional availability is no longer chasing validation. She's choosing alignment. She's not trying to be irresistible. She's trying to be respected. She's not trying to win attention. She's trying to build connection. And connection requires presence. The beautiful part? When you shift what you're attracted to, you shift what you tolerate. And when you shift what you tolerate, you shift what you experience. That's how standards quietly reshape your life. You no longer feel impressed by emotional unavailability, disguised as mystery. You're impressed by emotional courage. You're impressed by consistency. You're impressed by a man who can hold space without losing himself, because you've learned to hold space for yourself first. And that's why emotional availability became more attractive than chemistry. Not because you settled, but because you matured. Not because you stopped feeling sparks, but because you stopped confusing sparks with substance. And when substance becomes your standard, love feels different, calmer, clearer, stronger, not explosive, but enduring. If this resonated with you, subscribe to Depths of US. This is where we talk about emotional maturity, self-worth, boundaries, attachment patterns, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing yourself deeply. And tell me in the comments, did your type change when your self-worth did? Let's talk about it.